Kepler-Poinsot polyhedra and the regular tilings are left out of discussions about regular polyhedra, even though they're just as cool as, if not cooler than, the platonic solids. It would have been fun, you know? I could have gone into things like what sorts of new shapes are allowed when you remove some of the restrictions. I could have had a reason to bring up the stella octangula, but as I was doing the bare minimum amount of research necessary to make sure I wasn't missing any regular polyhedra, I found something. It turns out I was missing some. I was missing quite a few, in fact, so many that it would have been very silly to put out a video saying that there's exactly 12 of them. Part 6. The Petrie-Coxeter polyhedra. In 1926, John Petrie discovered a pair of infinite polyhedra which, unlike the regular tilings, are not flat. Shortly afterwards, Petrie's fellow geometer, Donald Coxeter, found a third one. Wikipedia calls these the regular skew-epirahedra, but I think calling them the Petrie-Coxeter polyhedra is more fitting. Before I can explain the Petrie-Coxeter polyhedra, it'll be helpful to start with an analogy in polygons. Imagine a triangle. Now add one side and make it a square. Add another side and make it a pentagon, and keep doing that. As you keep adding more sides, the shape you get starts looking more like a circle. And once you have infinitely many sides, you end up with an epiragon, which looks exactly like a circle. But it only looks like a circle because we're too far zoomed out to see the individual edges. Indeed, since there are infinitely many of them, and since the circle has a finite circumference, if we're thinking about the regular epiragon as being like a circle, each edge must be infinitesimally small. So let's zoom in infinitely far so we can see the individual edges. At this zoom level, it doesn't look like a circle at all, it looks like a line. Just like the regular tilings of the plane, this is an infinitely large shape that's also completely flat. Can you make a regular epiragon that isn't flat? Well, yes, you can. All you need to do is something like this. This is a shape which infinitely alternates between its edges going up and down in a regular pattern. The technical name for this shape is a zigzag, and a zigzag is entirely within our definition of a regular polygon. It doesn't actually matter what the angle is, so a zigzag can be however wide or narrow you want. The key observation that leads from zigzags to the Petrie-Coxeter polyhedra is this. Look closely at this square tiling. You can see here that within this grid there exists a clear zigzag pattern, and in fact the same thing can be found in the other two regular tilings. Maybe, by examining the tilings of 3D space, we'll be able to find infinite polyhedra that aren't flat, and that's exactly what Petrie and Coxeter did. Tilings of 3D space are usually called honeycombs, which I think is specifically to make it so you can't call the hexagonal tiling a honeycomb tiling. All three of the Petrie-Coxeter polyhedra are derived from the cubic honeycomb. The cubic honeycomb is a tiling of 3D space made out of infinitely many cubes. By following a zigzag-like pattern along the square faces of all the cubic cells, you can end up with a regular polyhedron called a mu cube. A helpful way to think about the mu cube is to think of it as being made out of cubes that have two opposite faces missing. By arranging 6 of these almost cubes in a cube-like form, you get the basic building block of the mu cube. This can be extended infinitely to get the real thing. Next is the mu octahedron, which is based on a bitruncated cubic honeycomb. While this honeycomb is derived from the cubic honeycomb, it'll be easier to explain how it's structured from the ground up. Its cells are not cubes, but rather truncated octahedra. Truncation is this process that I like to think of as being like cutting off the corners of a polyhedron. When you truncate an octahedron, its 8 triangular faces become hexagons, and its 6 vertices become squares. This shape isn't regular because it has 2 different types of faces, but it can be used to tile 3D space. And by simply removing all of the squares from this tiling, you get another regular polyhedron. The third Petrie-Coxeter polyhedra, which was Coxeter's contribution, is the mu tetrahedron, based on the quarter cubic honeycomb. It's derived from the cubic honeycomb, but it'll be easier to explain its structure if we talk about its cells instead. The cells of the quarter cubic honeycomb are tetrahedra and truncated tetrahedra. By removing all of the triangular faces of a quarter cubic honeycomb, you end up with a mu tetrahedron. And so, there we have it. 3 completely regular infinite polyhedra, and unlike the regular tilings, these babies have some actual depth to them. You've got the mu cube made out of infinitely many squares, and the mu octahedron and mu tetrahedron both made out of infinitely many hexagons. This is exciting stuff. Taking these 3 Petrie-Coxeter polyhedra into account, we can now say that there are in fact 15 regular polyhedra.
Hey video creators, with Envato Elements you can create better videos. How? With unlimited downloads of millions of creative assets, all with commercial license.
From here, things are going to get a lot weirder. Part 7. The petrioles. What exactly is a polygon? Yeah, I defined it earlier, but there might still be some assumptions that you're making that weren't a part of it. For example, there is nothing in the definition that restricts polygons to 2 dimensions. Let's say you were to take a zigzag, but rather than it just going off infinitely, you fold it up into the 3rd dimension, and you have it meet back on itself. This has some rather big implications. Like, okay, what is the area of this polygon? See, the question doesn't even make sense anymore. This thing doesn't have area, it doesn't even have an inside. This is what's called a skew polygon, and they're huge game changers. So what do you get when you try to make a polyhedron with skew polygons as its faces? This sounds tricky. Just like zigzags, it's not necessary for them to have set rigid structures to be regular. You can move them about and deform them while preserving the defining symmetries. Where would you even begin? What Petrie found was that you can actually take any polyhedron made out of normal flat polygon faces and convert it into another polyhedron made out of skew polygon faces. This is called the Petrie dual, or petriol, of the polyhedron. Take the cube, for instance. Let's rotate this cube so we're viewing it with one vertex facing us. Now look at the cube's silhouette. It sure looks a whole lot like a regular hexagon, doesn't it? Like maybe you could trace along this edge and draw a hexagon along the edges of this cube. Of course, once you rotate it again, the illusion breaks and it doesn't look like a regular hexagon anymore. But it is a regular hexagon. This is a regular skew hexagon, and it's built into the edges of a cube. This is called the cube's Petrie polygon. If you do this for half of the cube's 8 vertices, you can create a shape that looks exactly like a cube, but it's made out of 4 hexagons instead of 6 squares. Sometimes, finding the Petrie polygon of a regular polyhedron involves looking at its vertices. Other times it involves looking at its faces, and sometimes you just gotta use the more formal definition. Start at some vertex, and follow along some edge that it's connected to. By definition, this edge will always be part of exactly 2 faces. You can continue along the line you've drawn by turning left, so to speak, and following the face to the left of the edge you've drawn. Or you could turn right and follow along the face to the right. If you turn the same direction enough times in a row, in this case 5, you will end up back where you started, and you will have drawn one of the polyhedron's faces. But if instead of doing that, you alternate which way you turn each time, going left, then right, then left, then right, and so on, you will be tracing out the Petrie polygon instead. And yeah, all 15 of the regular polyhedra we've gone over already have their own petriols, giving us another 15 regular polyhedra. You might be wondering, say, what if you find the petriols of those petriols? Do you get another 15 new shapes? Well, if you take, for example, the petriol cube and try to find its petriol, what you end up with is just a normal cube. The property of being a petriol is always mutual. The cube and petriol cube are in fact petriols of each other. To properly understand the petriols, you need to really have this idea of a Petrie polygon down. Like, okay, here's 4 regular polyhedra. Just looking at their wireframes like this, they look exactly the same. 2 of them have flat faces which can be filled in, so we can see that this one is an icosahedron and this one is a great dodecahedron. But for these 2, we can't do that. The best option I have is to just highlight one of the skew faces so you can get a sense of the structure. And even then, it's still super hard to not just see it as an icosahedron. Here, let's have a quick montage of all of the Petrie polygons and how you can view them from a certain angle that makes them look more like normal, flat, regular polygons.
Messing about with gravity simulations and ended up making a little solar system which you could fly up.
Это нормально, просто халява. Нормально, как наоборот. Моя халява. все вранье, значит. То есть обнаружил меня просто, да. А вдруг нет? Почему вранье? Ну нет, это просто очень сложно как-то, да, это непонятно как сделать, да, еще столько их компонентов состоит и вообще там, да, как бы, да. Может это правильно, бравада просто, или все-таки так оно и есть. Ну да, понимаю, да. А кто за это браться-то будет, я не знаю, если оно так, а если не так, тогда вообще как бы, да, а куда оно уже движется куда-то сейчас? Вот, или никуда оно движется, потихоньку, помаленьку, да, помаленьку, понятно. Ну, значит, может ускорять можно как-то, ну а как? Ладно, это все муражи. Ну нет, ну согласись со мной, ну так если оно уже движется помаленьку, потихоньку как-то, а не движется, ну да, не умеем мы этого, да, я понимаю. Ну, да, это вот хороший вопрос, он понимает, он тебя, да. Вот видишь, да, вот так вот, да. Да. И при этом не девчонка, вот это что важно, да. Вот я понимаю, да. Да, вот надо, не знаю. Да, да, понял, я уже, да. Вот он пошел уже. Когда так? Ну да, так это правда. старина просто, это же будет просто так, ни в чем еще не будет. Да, понял тебя просто. Ну такая, как, а добро как людям, для охотной, да, настоящее, это что на века. За здоровье, за честь, чтобы все сразу было, знаешь, здоровье, честь, правда, как бы, и движение вперед. Ну, да, понимаю. Ну ладно, ну как бы, как этот мир запечатлеешь ты на своем труде, на деле? Да, понимаю, ну да. И сделаешь легче облегчение людям, то есть как бы ты же маг, шаман же, ты понимаешь, ты же художник, да, так сказать, да, чтобы как помочь людям думать о своей жизни, страдать, переживать, да, типа того, ну не знаю, да, страдать, переживать, да. Вот так вот, ну ладно, каждый свое думаешь, ну не знаю, ну ладно, ориентируйтесь туда сами.